This is the first week of the month, first weekend of the month, and so it's children's math, and so they know what to do. So come on up. Today, my other team members are out of town, so you're just stuck with me alone today, okay? Come on up. Good. What an amazing week that this has been. It's like it's been a week of wow. Because this week has been very unique. What we would say is very historic within the Catholic Church. Because of what has happened in the Catholic Church has not happened over 600 years. And this past week, it took place. What happened was that the leader of our Catholic Church, Pope Benedict, resigned from his position as Pope because of his health. Because he was just too weak to do the things that have been asked of him. He just didn't have the strength to continue to fulfill that position, to be the leader of so many people around the world. And so he made the decision that it was best for him and the church for him to step back and resign, and that we elect another pope. Now, many people have had different reactions to that resignation. Some people, they didn't know what to think. They were a bit nervous. They didn't know where the church was going to go now. Others were thinking that, wow, what an exciting time in the church, and to be a part of that. There was even one reporter who said, the Catholic Church is no longer the church without the Pope. What? I don't think so. When I heard that person say that, I thought, no, that is not true in any way. You see, the Catholic Church is not all about one person. First and foremost, it's about our God. It's about who Jesus is for us as church. God has promised way back when that He would always be with us. And because of that, it doesn't matter what happens to our church, to our community, we will always, always have God on our side. And so, during this time where we do not have a pope, we don't need to worry. We got God. I want us to look at that first reading of today. Because I think it says that God is with us at all times. It's the time about Moses was called by God to do His will. And Moses is somewhat coming up with some excuses. He's kind of concerned. He's like, I don't know if I can do this. What about this? What about that? He's concerned. He's a little nervous. He's a bit worried. And so he needed to be reassured by God. And so in so many words, God tells him, Moses, do not worry. I will be with you. Remember that. All you need to do is be the person I want you to be and do the things that I'm calling you to do. Be the person that I want you to be and do the things I've called you to do. And remember, I will be with you. You know what? That's great advice for any one of us. To remember God's promise to us. And I'm not talking about just remembering yesterday. Nor am I talking about remembering just a few months ago or a few years ago. I want us to remember all the way back to the very, very beginning. Because let me assure you, that's when we had God with us. And He assured us that He would never, ever leave us. Let me explain by sharing with you a story that I found about a couple that lived in California. Now, it is said of this couple that they really didn't have any faith expression. What I mean by that is that they really didn't believe in God. They didn't have a strong faith in God. This couple had a child of 3 years old. And the doctors and the nurses, the medical team, had told this couple that that child, for whatever reason, was going to be their only child. That this couple was not going to have another child. And so, knowing that, this couple poured upon this little one all of their love. Some would even say that child was a bit spoiled. This child was the couple's world. But, by God's design, and by God's miracle, they got pregnant again. They were excited, of course, but they were also concerned how their child, their 3-year-old, would react. Because after all, this was their only child at that point, and he had all of their attention. But when that new baby was going to come, that child was going to have to share that attention. The couple's concern was that their child might not understand. They were thinking, maybe he won't welcome the newborn baby. Maybe he's going to be a little bit jealous. And out of that jealousy, he might even cause harm to the new baby. Hurt that baby. Parents even went to counseling to give some advice on how to prepare their child. And so they had decided as a precaution that they were never going to leave that newborn baby alone. That one of them, either the mother or the father, would always be with that newborn baby, just to watch, to see if their 3-year-old maybe was a little jealous and might hurt the newborn baby. Well, the new baby came. And all was going very well. The now 4-year-old was reacting with great joy to his new baby brother. But one day, the wife was in the garage thinking that her husband was with the newborn baby. When the husband walked into the garage, both of them looked at each other and they were thinking, I thought you were with him. I thought you were with him. And immediately they dropped everything, thinking that the worst was about to happen. Both of them rushed into the living room where the newborn baby was on the floor on a blanket. And just before they interrupted what was taking place, they saw their 4-year-old with his hands cupped around the face of his baby brother, just like this. And they heard their 4-year-old say, Brother, tell me about God and his angels again. I'm starting to forget. Isn't that a great story? True story. What is important to realize is that there was really no faith in God in that family. There was really no belief in that couple. The parents were not the ones who introduced their child to God. I think that story speaks of how it all begins for each one of us. We are with God from the very beginning. But I think what happens somewhere along the line is that some people forget that. Little ones, pay attention. Everybody right here. I don't want you to forget that. I don't want you to ever forget that. God is with you. Always. That is his promise. God is a part of who we are. No matter what happens within the church, no matter what happens in the community, God is with us. And because of that, just like Moses did, you can do whatever he's asking you to do. I think that's the point that Jesus makes in the gospel today with the story about that fig tree. The tree was not giving fruit. What was up with that? I mean, come on. If it's a fruit tree, don't you think it should give fruit? Of course it should. But the person responsible for the garden said, Sir, maybe the tree needs help. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to help this tree. I'm going to cultivate the ground. I'm going to work the ground. I'm going to fertilize it and help that tree that in the future, it might give some fruit. I'm glad we have that story in the gospel today. Because it reminds us that we need one another. That we need one another in order to do what God asks of us. Which is another great point to make during this time when we do not have our leader, the Pope, within the Catholic Church. Little ones, we cannot forget one another. In fact, it would be crazy to do so. It's a story about a man who, after many years of work, had retired, and he moved back to his own hometown. One evening, he called up a friend to go over to visit, a high school friend that they hadn't seen each other in many years. Well, as the two men were visiting that evening, catching up on old times, the man's wife was coming in and out, serving them coffee and cake. And the man was always referring to his wife with such terms of endearment, like honey cakes, baby doll, sweetheart, darling, pumpkin, and words like that. Well, this really impressed the friend. He thought to himself, man, after all these years, over 50 years of marriage, my friend still has a strong sense of love for his wife. Well, when the wife was in the kitchen, the man who was visiting his friend said, you know what, I think that's wonderful. That after all these years that you have been married, you still call your wife those sweet little names. The friend looks over towards the kitchen to see if his wife would hear him. And then he turns to his friend and says, my friend, to tell you the truth, I forgot her name 10 years ago. You know what? This is the community, this is the church. We can't do that to one another. We cannot forget one another. Why? Because we're a part of one another. We are the church. We have to remember who we are. We have to remember our identity so that we can do the great things that God asks of us. Helping one another do those things. Those two things are so important for us to remember during this time. To remember that God is with us. And He has been with us from the very, very, very beginning. And He promises to stay. God will always be with us. And the second thing we need to remember is that we need to remember one another. We need to help one another do those things that God asks of us. I'm going to put it in this way. You remember the story of Pinocchio? And when he lied, what happened? His nose would grow. Yeah, he was changing himself because he wasn't true to himself. Well, there was another person who wrote a story somewhat like that, about a man who every time he did something that went against who he was, that went against his true identity, what would happen to him is he would shrink. He would shrivel up. Every time he did that, something that was not him, he would get smaller and smaller and smaller. I'm going to say that's a very good image of what could happen to people who forget to live their true identity. They become smaller and smaller and smaller. Let's not let that happen to us in our church. God has been with us throughout the years, and He will continue to be with us. Our church can grow bigger than what we are now. We just have to remember what we are all about. And what we are all about is basically the Lord Jesus. And not about just one individual person. If we remember that during this time, there's no need to worry. We may not have a pope, but we have God. We have God in the church. God is with us. And together, knowing that, we can do great things. Everything that God asks of us. You got it? Go back to